Today, we're diving into the incredible story of how a handful of swampy, pretty much forgotten islands became Bombay, the financial engine of India. But this wasn't just about paving over swamps. It was a real battle for the city's very soul.
Seems like a simple question, right? But after India gained independence in 1947, the answer to that question became a full-blown battleground. And we're not talking about a polite political debate here. This was a fight on the streets over identity, power, and wealth that would go on to define the city's entire future.
So you had two main camps. On one side, you had the Marathi people, and their argument was pretty straightforward. Hey, look at a map. This is our land, our culture. This city belongs here. But on the other side, you had these incredibly powerful communities like the Gujaratis and the Parsis who were basically saying, hold on, our money, our business sense, that's what made this city a powerhouse.
And trust me, this was far from a peaceful discussion. It spilled out into a violent struggle right on the streets. In just 1 week in 1956, over 80 people were killed during protests demanding that Bombay become the capital of a Marathi state. To really get why things got so heated, we have to go way back to the city's totally improbable beginnings.
All right, let's jump in the time machine and rewind a few centuries. We're going to a time when Bombay wasn't this massive prize to be fought over. In fact, it was seen as almost completely worthless. For hundreds of years, these 7 swampy little islands, mostly home to Koli fishing villages, were just kind of passed around. They went from the Gujarat Sultanate to the Portuguese. They were, a pretty minor colonial spot. But then, in 1661, a royal wedding over in Europe changed everything.
Yeah, you heard that right. Portugal was desperate for an alliance with the powerhouse of Britain. So when their Princess Catherine married King Charles II, they just threw the Bombay Islands into the wedding gift package. They weren't the main prize. They were basically a throw-in, a diplomatic afterthought.
The king very quickly realized these swampy, malaria-infested islands were way more trouble than they were worth. So he couldn't have been happier to lease them to the super ambitious East India Company for a price that is just laughable. We're talking 10 pounds in gold per year. But you know the saying, one man's trash is another man's treasure. Where the King of England saw a useless swamp, the company saw a golden opportunity. This was their chance to build a port that they controlled 100% with no meddling from local kings or Mughal governors. So they launched this really radical experiment. Under a guy named Governor Gerald Angier, the company put out a deal that was pretty much unheard of in 17th century India. They offered guaranteed religious freedom for everybody, tax breaks for merchants, protection from pirates. It was basically a giant neon sign saying, come here, bring your business, and we'll make sure you can operate in peace.
And boy, did it work. The response was just immediate and explosive. In just 7 years, the population grew 8 times over. You had Parsi, Gujarati, Jewish, and Muslim trading communities all flocking to this new city of opportunity.
Okay, so the city is buzzing. It's growing fast. But then, in the 1800s, 2 massive global events happen that just pour gasoline on the fire, turning Bombay from a busy port into a center of unbelievable wealth. First, you've got Britain's Opium Wars, which basically forced China's doors open and created this huge, insatiable demand for Indian opium. Then, halfway across the planet, the American Civil War kicks off, and suddenly Britain's textile mills have no cotton. For both of these global crises, Bombay became the answer. It became the main port for shipping both of these commodities. And this chart just shows you how completely dominant these two things became. Together, opium and cotton made up almost 80% of everything the city exported. I mean, can you imagine the fortunes being made by the merchants controlling that trade? It's staggering. This kind of boom didn't just make people rich, it created entire dynasties. And this quote here nails it. The profits from the, at the time, legal opium trade were literally the seed money used to help build the Tata Group, which, as you know, would become India's most iconic industrial empire. But here's the thing about a gold rush. Not everybody gets rich. As all this money poured into Bombay, it started to carve these deep, deep social divides into the city, fault lines that would set the stage for all the conflict that came later. You started to see this very clear economic ladder form. The communities that had shown up with money and trade connections, the Parsis, Gujaratis, Jains, they became the city's owners, its bankers, its industrialists, the capital class. At the same time, the local Marathi population, a lot of them moving in from nearby villages, they became the city's workforce. The mill workers, the clerks, the dock laborers, the labor class. So this is really the heart of the issue. This economic split created this really powerful feeling among a lot of Marathi people. It was this sense that, hey, this is our ancestral land, but we're just workers in a city that's owned and run by outsiders.
And that feeling, that brings us right back to where we started, to that intense battle after independence. Because now you can see it wasn't just about a piece of land. It was a fight over economic power, about cultural identity, and about who really gets to feel like they belong.
So how did this all end? Well, after years of total deadlock, with intense pressure from the business community on one side and those deadly street protests of the Samyukta Maharashtra movement on the other, the Indian government finally realized something had to give. A compromise had to be made. And so, on May 1st, 1960, the battle finally reached its climax. The government split the huge Bombay state right down the middle along linguistic lines. A new state, Gujarat, was created for Gujarati speakers. And the state of Maharashtra was created for the Marathi people, with the ultimate prize, Bombay itself, becoming its capital. And that decision really cemented the city's dual identity, an identity that's still very much alive today. Politically, it has a Marathi heart. It's the capital of Maharashtra. But its economic engine, its social soul, that was undeniably forged by all those different communities who were drawn to it over hundreds of years. So the battle for Bombay was officially settled on paper back in 1960. But that tension, that push and pull between its local Marathi identity and its global multicultural character, well, that continues to shape the city's story even now. It was a city built by so many different hands, which leaves us with one last big question. Can a city like that ever truly belong to just one group of people?